I opened TikTok, and this is literally the very first TikTok that came up. So I'm going to put it next to the speaker or the microphone. We'll see what happens. Oh, shoot. No, I don't want to look for hats like his.
Does anyone actually live in Kansas? Because I just got back from a 12-hour car ride going from Denver, Colorado, back to Missouri, and there's nothing there. Nothing. Sorry, that's not true. There is an uncomfortable amount of windmills, but there's no people. So if you live in Kansas, I'm sorry, but you don't exist in my mind. There is nothing there.
This is where I get out my clapping energy. It's like the interstate is the most boring path you could possibly take through Kansas.
It is the straightest path and the most direct path, not the path.
Yeah. And there are so many things waiting to be discovered. You just got to get off the dang interstate.
Welcome back to Ask a Kansan, everybody. I'm Sydney.
And I'm Gus.
We are a podcast where we're uncovering, amplifying, and connecting Kansas.
And today we have an interesting guest. His name is Rex Buchanan. He is the Director Emeritus at the Kansas Geological Survey. And yeah, our interview covered a lot of subjects, but really focused on earthquakes and water.
Yes. And I felt really overdressed because he came in super comfy, and I was really jealous of his shirt, to be quite honest.
He's chilling in retirement.
Chill.
It's great.
He was full retirement today, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, that's great. So here's our interview with Rex Buchanan. Welcome to Ask a Kansan.
Sure.
And could we just start by having you introduce yourself for our audience?
Rex Buchanan. I'm from Lawrence, former director of the Kansas Geological Survey.
So I understand you grew up near Little River. Is that correct?
Yeah. You know where Little River is?
Yeah. I live in McPherson, so we go to Little River all the time.
Okay, so you're not too far away. And where are you from?
We're both from Salina.
From Salina?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So on a farm. I grew up on a farm outside of Little River, and then I actually went to Westland to college. So I've got some Salina connections from that. And I worked while I was at Westland. I also worked at the Salina Journal, which is just like,
it's not far.
Yeah, it's not
just
far
kind of
from
off
here.
this direction here.
Yeah.
So so I had some connections to the community from that.
So I know that Little River is not far or close to the Smoky Hills. Did you, as a kid, have any geologic interest in any of that stuff, or did that come later?
Yeah, I think so. People tend to think of the Smoky Hills in, say, Ellsworth County, Russell County, Lincoln County. But there's an arm that comes down through Rice County, right on the edge of where I grew up. Probably I did have an interest. Like a lot of kids, I had a rock collection, and I was interested in that sort of thing. I would say the bigger thing was I grew up on a farm, and I was telling somebody the other day that for the most part, when you grow up on a farm, the only time you're in the house is when it's too dark to work or you're sick, one of the two. I didn't get sick very often, so we kind of grew up outdoors. And I would say I'd give that some credit to sort of the direction I felt like I wanted to go when I left there, which was I wanted to do something that had a connection to the outdoors. So I wound up with an undergraduate degree from Wesleyan in biology, but I would say a lot of growing up influenced kind of the career path that I went on. And in geology, you're outside all the time. And I always tell people that the worst day in the field is still better than the best day in the office, okay? And that's the nice thing about geology was when the weather's really crappy, there's always stuff to do indoors, but it provides the opportunity to go out in the field. And particularly, I was at the Kansas Geological Survey, very Kansas focused, and that kind of fit in with how I identified myself too.
Is it fair to say, like the main focus of your career has been science communication?
I tell people I have a little bit of trouble. I think folks have trouble defining me, and I have a little trouble defining myself. If you were to ask me what I think of myself, I'd probably tell you I think of myself as a writer because, like I said, I did that work at the Salina paper, then I did some of that in graduate school. When I started the Geological Survey, it's part of the University of Kansas. And so when I came there, I had a joint appointment, both doing science writing at the Geological Survey and teaching science writing at the KU Journalism School. So I thought of myself that way. I still think of myself that way. And yet I would probably, my guess is most folks that don't know me real well, probably some of them think of me as more on the scientific side, whereas folks in the scientific community probably don't think of me that way. I don't spend a lot of time giving that thought, but yeah, I probably think of myself as a writer first and foremost, more than anything else. So what do you do in McPherson?
So I live in McPherson, but I work here.
But you work here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I moved to, grew up in Salina, moved to McPherson in 2020, and then COVID hit. Used to work for the city of McPherson, and then found my way here.
Over here? Okay.
Yeah.
And you grew up in Salina?
I did. Yeah, I went to Wesleyan. Actually, Tanner there also went to Wesleyan.
Yeah.
And he
Well, yeah,
worked
I was
at the Journal as well. So
well, yeah, and he and I met out at the Pawnee Indian Village Museum because I was doing a story about that. And yeah, so when did you graduate from Wesleyan?
I was 2014.
So it's like yesterday. It's a little different than when I was there. I was there a long time ago.
So what led to you becoming the interim director of the KGS?
Yeah, I started at the survey in 78. And like I said, I had a joint appointment originally. After 6 or 7 years, I kind of came to the realization I had to make a choice. I would do one thing or the other. I was not real good at splitting jobs. And so I decided to focus on what I was doing at the survey. Over time, I wound up with more and more administrative responsibility, mostly for the sort of the public component, not so much the research component of the place. And then over time, with the additional administrative experience, they asked me to take on that role. So that's what I did the last 6 or 7 years I was there. I still work there a little bit, but for the most part retired in 2016. So I guess in about 2010, they asked me to take that role on, and I did it. It wasn't anything I'd really ever aspired to. It was interesting, and I learned a lot. The big issue that came up at the time that I did that was induced seismicity or man-made earthquakes. And really, that was what I spent most of that 5 or 6 years dealing with. And it was not anything I expected to do, really didn't have any background. But it was an issue that kind of came onto the scene, and it was something that I did. And I'm still involved with earthquake and seismic issues as a result.
As I was reading about that element of your background, I thought about a movie from the 90s called Dante's Peak, starring Pierce Brosnan. He's a USGS volcanologist, and there's obviously a volcanic eruption, and it's very sexy in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me reading through kind of the public relations that you had to do, that it was very not sexy. And like,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
What I mean by that is it was hard work.
If my wife was here,
trenches.
she would agree with you, by the way. I'm the perfect person for a role like that.
And
I'm sorry, what was the question? I'm still sort of recovering.
What I mean by that is that you put in your time in the trenches there, kind of interfacing between the scientists
and the world
and business and the politics. You're kind of, in some ways, the punching bag between all of those different people.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that's a good point. Because I had a lot of experience sort of interacting with the public, then that became a critical component of dealing with the earthquake stuff. And so I was fairly well equipped to do that sort of thing. In the process, we became... In effect, the governor had asked us to lead the effort to try and figure out how to deal with earthquakes and in the state. In that process, I think we were at certain times sort of unpopular with everybody. The general public was certainly unhappy with the rate of seismicity. They wanted something done about it. At the same time, there was clearly a strong connection between those earthquakes and the oil and gas activities going on in the state at the time. we got pushback from those folks as well. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that that there were days when it was not the most pleasant job in the world. It wasn't something that I really expected to deal with. When we'd have a big earthquake, and we had some big earthquakes, my phone would just buzz across the counter. And there were days when I sort of felt like it was hard to make anybody happy. But over time, I think we got to a good place, and I think we got to a good resolution. I think it worked the way that it should have worked, but it wasn't always. There were a couple of years where it was fairly stressful. I would say on your movie reference, though, to go back to that, I did come down here one time to Salina because they did a showing, not of your Pierce Brosnan movie, but I think actually as a movie might have even been called Earthquake. It was kind of one of those 70s movies in the vein of, what's the movie? Oh, you guys are too young. The movie where the ship turns upside down. It's kind of the disaster type movies that were popular for a while. Well, this was sort of in that same vein. So they showed that at the Salina Art Center Theater over here, that little theater on Santa Fe. And they asked me to give up and give a talk and sort of make a connection between The Poseidon Adventure. That was the name. You know this movie? So
Sure.
no, I know you
I'm
don't.
sorry.
But anyway,
fake my way through it. But
my memory, it wasn't that great a movie. The earthquake movie was really not that great a movie, but it was, in a lot of respects, sort of what the public knew, and certainly sort of fit with their conceptions of what earthquakes were about. So actually, I thought it was a good idea. I enjoyed coming down here, and that's a neat little theater over there.
it is.
And so it was a good evening. Yeah.
So you mentioned the task force that was formed to address the earthquakes. Can you remind me, just briefly, who the other kind of parties were?
The Geological Survey doesn't regulate anything. Our purpose in life is to study and to report on geologic issues and resources. And going into this stuff with induced seismicity, I would have told you our primary focus was on oil and gas issues and water issues because those are the two big geologic resources in Kansas. We don't have any regulatory authority, but the organizations that do regulate activities that were involved with oil and gas production and water disposal, which turned out to be ultimately the culprit here, were the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and the Kansas Corporation Commission. The Corporation Commission is responsible for what people call Class 2 disposal wells. I know we're getting into the weeds a little bit here, but you ask. When you produce oil in this state, you also produce water. It comes up naturally. It's down there with the oil, and it comes up naturally. It's highly saline, very salty water. You don't want that water to get loose at the surface because of the damage it'll do to the ground, so you've got to dispose of it. And I tell people when I was a kid growing up outside of Little River in the 50s, people built what they called evaporation pits, and they would dump that water into these big earthen pits. They said it evaporated, but it didn't. It just soaked into the ground, and that saline water has contaminated aquifers in parts of Kansas and where they're still dealing with that issue today. Today, almost all of that natural saline water is pumped back into very deep geologic horizons, not necessarily where it came from, sometimes even deeper. That's how we dispose of that. In about 2008, 2009, the production level of wells down in particularly Oklahoma, but some up in south central Kansas, there was a play, an oil and gas activity in which people were producing oil in such a fashion that it was producing a lot more water than typically it had. In some cases, it wouldn't be unusual originally to produce, say, 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil that you produce. This play down in that part of the world was producing sometimes as much as 100 barrels of water for every barrel of oil. We had to get rid of an awful lot more water than people were used to getting rid of. What we found was if you pump it into a certain geologic horizon, it would, in effect, trigger faults to move that had previously been stressed but inactive, and that would create earthquakes. regulating that saltwater disposal is primarily responsibility of Kansas Corporation Commission. So those were the partners that we had. Now, we also worked with folks in the oil and gas community because they were doing the disposal. We particularly worked with a lot of folks in Oklahoma because they had this issue prior to us having it. They had it much worse than we had it. We watched their experiences and how they dealt with it to know how we should deal with it. And so it was a pretty wide-ranging, and we dealt with environmental communities, even dealt with the insurance community because that came into play in this process. So it required a lot of conversations, a lot of dealing with a lot of different communities. We eventually came up with a plan, combination of some disposal cutbacks. Also, oil and gas prices went down. There was less production, less water to get rid of. Between those two things, they pretty well resolved the issue. Now, having said all that, there are still small earthquakes that come up in this part of the world today. There was a time when really that induced seismicity is really focused, say, down southwest of Wichita, like down in the Wellington area or Harper County, down in there. Well, eventually sort of worked its way north. So then you had a lot of activity in the Wichita area, and then you had some big earthquakes in Hutch. And now you've got them almost, I don't know if you guys have felt any up here, but you've certainly had them. And that McPherson County, Saline County area, not so much here recently, but there was a big spate of those within just the last few years. Nothing really huge, nothing as big as certainly the earthquakes we saw down in Oklahoma, but certainly enough to be disconcerting in the part of the world where you're not used to feeling earthquakes. That very much had an effect on people in this part of the world. I even remember a conversation I had with the president out at Westland one day when those were kind of at their peak, because we talked a little bit about Pioneer Hall, which is an old
masonry,
old building, brick and mason type building that it's the type section of what you worry about. And we had conversations about how much you should look at that because it's got some of these kind of turrets up on the top of it that are brick. And we had conversations about what do you do? What can we expect? So it's an issue that, involves this part of the world a little bit.
Well, when we do have earthquakes, it of course comes up again in the public discourse, but it seems like the level that it was at back in 2013 to 15 has pretty well come down.
You haven't seen anything up here nearly of the size of what we had then. The biggest of those was actually about right toward the end, one of the biggest was on Labor Day of 2016. And it was a Saturday morning, about 7 o'clock, and it occurred in Pawnee, Oklahoma, which is about 20, 30 miles south of the Kansas-Oklahoma border. That was initially measured at a 5.6. I think now they may even put it at a 5.7. That's a big earthquake. And I remember that one in particular because Saturday morning I had a cold and I wasn't feeling good and I was sleeping kind of late and it woke me up and I knew what it was. I mean, it went on and on. And my first thought was, please God, let it be in Oklahoma. And it was, but just barely. My phone just blew up with phone calls about the thing. And that was a big earthquake. Those felt, and there were a lot of fairly big earthquakes in that process. We haven't had anything of that magnitude really for quite a while. But when you live in a part of the world that is not used to seismic activity, and then all of a sudden you have earthquakes become almost as a daily kind of, certainly weekly kind of thing, people get upset. And I remember fairly early on when and by the way, I haven't talked about this stuff for quite a while. People don't ask me about it much anymore because it has died down. But really early on when we were dealing with this issue, we reported regularly to the county commissioners down in Harper County because they were the ones that were really kind of ground zero for this thing. And I remember one morning, one of them called me up after an earthquake and said, the problem is, if we have tornadoes, we get tornado warnings, and we know what to do. With earthquakes, we don't get any warning, and we don't know what to do. So here was a group of people in a part of the state that hadn't seen any activity that suddenly are facing an issue that scares them pretty bad. Having said that, at the same time, I'll never forget this. The first time we went down there, the first thing they said to me was, we want the earthquakes to stop, but we don't want the oil and gas guys to go away. And I remember thinking, well, you can have one of those, but I'm not sure you can have both of those. Now, at the end of the day, I think the way we approached the problem, I think you can do both of those things. You've just got to take certain steps when you dispose of that water. But I'll also say a lot of the resolution of that came as a result of a lot of conversations. And that's sort of, I think, how Kansans going about solving their problems, which is sometimes it takes a lot of conversation and a lot of back and forth. And it may not be the fastest way to get to a resolution, but it is a way that involves everybody that's involved. And that's what we were trying to do. And that's eventually where we came down in that process. So today, I don't think it's an issue that really people, it doesn't get their attention like it did 10 years ago. Yeah.
It strikes me as a success story and a lot of the success stories I see around the state these days are because it's organizations working with other organizations in a low ego way to just focus on whatever the problems are and get them done.
Yeah, I think it is a success story. And I think most people that watched us around the country, because obviously Oklahoma was dealing with it, we were dealing with it, Texas eventually was dealing with it. All sorts of states were dealing with it, and they were all watching each other, trying to figure out, well, what works and what doesn't. And I would argue, that it was a success story as we look back on it. For what it's worth, I think in a lot of respects, that model is applicable throughout natural resources in the state. And I'd probably argue that it's just as applicable, say, in terms of water issues that the state faces. That where we've had success in dealing with water issues, it's been the result of long-term engagements across lines that maybe don't ordinarily talk to each other, a lot of conversations. That I think is sort of a Kansas way of doing things. And I always tell people, Kansans, I think, will do almost anything you ask them to and almost nothing that you tell them to, okay? So had we, as an earthquake group, if we had just gone out and said, okay, Corporation Commission said, you are, by God, going to shut down these disposal wells, I don't think that would not certainly been well received within the oil and gas community, and probably wouldn't been well received even within the local community, because they didn't want the oil and gas community shut down. They wanted them to operate, but they wanted them to operate in a fashion that didn't set off earthquakes, and which is eventually where we got. So I think it was an example of where long-term, slow conversations are sometimes your only option for dealing with issues like that.
Kansas Wesleyan is proud to be the educational crossroads of North Central Kansas. As a partner of Ask a Kansan, we share the desire to build our communities and to discover what makes our region special. Learn more about the power of and at kwu.edu. You've mentioned water. That's a great segue, I think, to the aquifer. I actually noticed just today, Kansas Geological Survey posted a map that shows the kind of the change to the aquifer from pre-development to the average of the last couple of years.
Right.
And it paints a fairly startling image. Some areas in Kansas, the aquifer is 40% of its original thickness, I guess is the right way to say that. I guess first I just wanted to ask a little technical question. They refer to it as the Kansas High Plains Aquifer, and I'd never heard that term. I've always heard Ogallala. Could you speak to that briefly? Yeah,
and before I do, that map, I'm pretty sure came out of a book that I did with Don Steeples called Kansas Geomap, which is available for sale from the survey. So we'll do a plug for that. Yeah,
perfect.
And it has a whole bunch of different maps in it. The High Plains Aquifer is kind of an all-inclusive term for an aquifer that underlies all or parts of 8 states. Now, you may not have heard of the High Plains Aquifer, but you probably heard of the Ogallala Aquifer. Yep. And when you say the aquifer, that's probably what you meant, the Ogallala. Now, there are a lot of different aquifers in Kansas. In my world, people typically wouldn't say the aquifer because that doesn't narrow it down any. In the outside world, in your world, if somebody says the aquifer, I pretty much assume, that they're talking about the Ogallala. The Ogallala is a subset of the High Plains Aquifer. In Kansas, there are 3 aquifers that are part of the High Plains. So sometimes you'll hear people use those terms interchangeably, High Plains and Ogallala. They're not interchangeable. The Ogallala is part of the High Plains Aquifer. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, and I'm not thinking of one right at the moment, but let's say the English department is part of the University of Kansas, okay? The broader term is the University of Kansas. A subset of the University of Kansas is the College of Liberal Arts, all right? Sure. The Ogallala is a subset of the High Plains.
So how should we? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Can we back up a little bit?
No, we can't. We gotta plunge forward here.
People like me who are not walking dictionaries, what's an aquifer?
Okay, an aquifer
Thanks for
is
asking. That's good.
an aquifer is an underground rock formation in which water is within the pore spaces in between the particles of rock that can be pumped out in amounts sufficient to create a well. That's kind of the technical definition.
Okay.
Let's think of it this way: a sponge holds water. Okay, it's in the pore space of the sponge, not the sponge itself.
Right.
Think of an aquifer as just an underground water-saturated sponge. Well, instead of sponge, it's rock materials. In the case of the Ogallala, it's the water-containing part of the aquifer is sand and gravel. So if you think about a sand pile out there and you think about dumping water on a sand pile, it can, in effect, absorb a lot of water in that pore space in between the grains of sand. That's what the Ogallala primarily is, sands and gravels. Other kinds of aquifers in other parts of the state, it might be a sandstone aquifer. You mentioned the Smoky Hills. The part of the rock unit within the Smoky Hills that I think of most is the Dakota Formation, sandstone. The water in the Dakota Formation is within little particles of sandstone. So when we talk about aquifers, a lot of times people, they want to talk about underground lakes, or underground rivers. Those may occur in a very few places in Kansas. They certainly don't occur around here, and that's not what we're talking about with the Ogallala, okay? What we're talking about is water-saturated rock, not an underground lake or river. And so one of the guys I work with always says, don't think of the Ogallala as if you could drill a big round hole and send a scuba diver down. It's not going to work like that. So that's what an aquifer is. If you can produce water from those rocks in sufficient amounts to have a well, that's what an aquifer is. And the Ogallala is a big deal because it's very extensive and it's got a lot of water. It's really high quality water. And that map shows that in some parts and it underlies about the western third of Kansas. And in places, now it's highly variable from place to place. There are parts of western Kansas where it does not exist at all. There are other parts of western Kansas where it's like 400 feet thick. So there's a lot of water in some places. The use of that water then has changed the landscape out there. Now, this doesn't mean anything to you guys, but when I was a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s, nobody grew corn in western Kansas because it was too dry. Today, you can grow corn. The upshot of that is you can grow corn because of irrigation from the Ogallala. The upshot of that is you can feed it to cattle. So now there are big feedlots out there that didn't used to be there. With the upshot of that is you now get big packing plants in places like Liberal and Garden and Dodge where you didn't used to. When I was a kid, I had a feedlot on our farm, and we took fat cattle to typically Wichita, sometimes Kansas City, maybe Omaha, but typically Wichita. Today, there aren't packing plants in any of those towns. They're all out west because that's where the cattle are. And the cattle are there because it's where the corn is, and the corn is there because that's where the water is. The other impact of that is that's also affected then the groups of folks that come in to work at those packing plants. So that landscape out there, both culturally and physically, has changed dramatically since about the 60s, and it's all as a result of water from the Ogallala.
How urgent is this crisis? Is it a crisis? Is that even the right word for it?
Well, when I first started the survey, my boss would always argue that it wasn't a crisis. It was something we had plenty of time to deal with. I've never actually gone to look up the definition of crisis in terms of time. If you think of crisis as something that's immediate and absolutely you have to do something right now, when you stop breathing, it's probably a crisis, okay? If you have a health problem that you can sort of live with that might kill you over the course of 40 or 50 years, is that a crisis? I don't know. I mean, I've never really looked the word up.
So is this the latter rather than the former?
Here's what I would say, sort of a slow motion crisis. And that's one of the problems is it's real easy to put off dealing with a slow motion crisis. And by and large, I think that's what we've done. You're probably not going to run out of water tomorrow. Probably not going to run out of water a year from now in a lot of places. But if you continue to pump it at the rates that we have been pumping it, you will run out. Is that a crisis? Well, maybe not for me. I mean, I'm 71 years old. I don't know how much time I got left, but the odds are pretty high that the aquifer is going to outlive me for the most part. Is it going to outlive you guys? I don't think so. Well, you might be saying, well, kind of so what? What difference does it make? Well, that's a good question, because certainly there are people out there that will say that water's not doing anybody any good down under the ground. We might as well use it. We might as well make money using it. We might as well produce food, which you eat, by using it. All right? We might as well use it to grow corn to make ethanol. We might as well use it now. That's one argument. The problem with that is that if you use it at an unsustainable rate, that day will come when you can't use it anymore. I was talking to a friend of mine at the survey the other day that said there was a proposal that he had heard from some folks out by Ulysses, out in southwestern Kansas, to maybe bring in one of these big data centers as kind of a local industry. But that requires water. Well, I would probably make the argument that you might want to look at industries that are maybe a little less water intensive as compared to, say, growing corn, that might be sustainable, that you might have around 100 years from now, as opposed to using all that water now. I think the question is, how do you want this state to look 50 or 100 years from now? Yeah. I don't know if that's a crisis or not, but I would argue that water issue with the High Plains Aquifer and the Ogallala in particular is the biggest, most intractable natural resource issue facing this state. And actually, I would probably argue, if you were to ask me, it's the biggest issue facing the state, period. Now, obviously, I come at this from a natural resource perspective, and I'm sure you can come up with a lot of other problems that Kansas faces. But if you ask me, this may not be an immediate crisis, but long term, it is central to what this state's going to look like 50 years from now.
How you tied agriculture and then basically the entire economy of the western half of the state to that paints it much more dramatically than I
I wouldn't say the entire economy. Okay, certainly there are places where dry land farming takes place now, dry land, and that's non-irrigated farming, and that will take place in the future. Whether the Ogallala is there or not, that economy marches forward. There's a lot of economy out there. But here's one component of this that I don't hear people talk about very often. Everybody's sort of well aware that those counties have emptied out in terms of people. I mean, for the most part, you look at the population of those counties, there are some counties that have incredibly small numbers of people out there. There are high schools that have graduating classes of 5, okay? That's before we've seen the impact of this in a big way, okay? If you think that issue of demographics is facing the western third of Kansas now, you wait for 20 or 30 years. It'll really affect it. Now, again, people may say, well, that's the way it goes. And if that's your response, that's your response, okay? It may very well be. A lot of times when people look at population out there, they compare the population today to the population in 1890. And almost every one of those counties had a lot more people in it in 1890 compared to 2025. Well, maybe the correct response is, well, there were just too many people out there in 1890. It couldn't carry that many people. That's one response. You can look at this in all sorts of different ways. All I'm saying is the options for people to live out there are going to be severely reduced if the water goes away.
For me personally, as I look at the issues that we face as I'll say even more widely as a society, we often choose a negative framing on those. And I guess as I view this, and what you're saying is we need a new vision for Kansas, for the western half of the state, that is less reliant on water as a economic driver. Is that a fair assertion?
Well, I don't think I would have said that. Okay. For starters, right off the chute, I would not say, I think we need a new vision for western Kansas for 50 years down the road, partly because I grew up in central Kansas, and partly because I live in eastern Kansas now.
People in western
and
Kansas
the people
are part of
in
that
western Kansas do not really appreciate folks from other parts of the
From
state
other-
waltzing in and saying, here, I'm an expert. Let me tell you what to do. Okay. So I would be loath to put it in those words. I will also say, though, if you look at the legal framework of water in effect belongs to the people of the state of Kansas. And that's everybody in the state of Kansas, not just the folks that pump water for irrigation. So everybody has a stake in this thing, and everybody needs to be part of the conversation. I do think it ought to be a conversation for how people want this state to look 50 years down the road. Having said that, a lot of those conversations have taken place already, and I think I used the word intractable, and it's been intractable. Now, having said that, there are places where progress has certainly been made, and folks have come together and sort of voluntarily agreed that they're going to cut back like 20% over the course of 5 years and see how that works. And there was a group of folks in Sheridan County, northwestern Kansas, came together and did that. Everybody watched it, and it turns out that if you maybe grow a few different crops, if you schedule pumping differently, if you're a little more efficient, you can use 20% less water and you'll still make as much money. And that may not quite hit sustainability, but it certainly will extend the life of the aquifer significantly. If you take that approach throughout western Kansas, then you may extend the life of what folks do out there significantly as well. But to go back to the earthquakes, it takes a lot of conversations, and it doesn't happen overnight. And even with those conversations, sometimes you don't get where you need to go. But the Sheridan County folks, they got there. There are other parts of the state where folks got there. It is doable, but it can be slow and painful, and particularly in a politically divided time like we're in now, it's even tougher. I mean, we've picked kind of a bad time to be politically at odds with each other in terms of the natural resource part of the world, I would say. So it is doable, but it's going to require a lot of conversation, and folks just may not agree. Yeah.
Going back a little bit back into the earthquake side of things, I read that there was a couple articles that came out, I think out of Lawrence, that incorrectly tied, you know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about.
Hydraulic
fracking and hydraulic fracturing, and yeah.
And you got a lot of pushback because of that article from the governor, from oil and gas.
Yeah.
And it struck me that you were running, a science-based organization that needs to be fairly insulated from politics. However, you have to communicate in a political environment.
Yeah.
How do you balance those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously, you've been doing your internet homework and going back, reading some articles that I probably don't have the wherewithal. Revisiting some of those times is not pleasant. Yeah, a lot of folks attributed those earthquakes to hydraulic fracturing or fracking because everybody in the environmental community hated fracking at that time. Well, those earthquakes weren't caused directly by fracking. I mean, fracking does cause small earthquakes almost by definition, but it was saltwater disposal, as we've already discussed. Now, you can say fracking led to the production of additional water, therefore fracking had a role in it. Well, maybe if you want to define it that way, you can make that argument. That's not how I defined it, because to solve the problem, we couldn't turn around and say, hey, you can't frack wells anymore, because something like at least half of the wells in Kansas have been fracked since the 1940s, okay? So that was not in the cards. You have to define your terms correctly. And so I routinely would say these earthquakes are not caused by hydraulic fracturing, they're caused by saltwater disposal. And I remember I think it was the Lawrence paper, one of the folks from Sierra Club said that I was being disingenuous. And I remember thinking, I don't even know when I'm being disingenuous or not. I'm impressed that they could tell. But yeah, it sort of felt like people thought I was dodging something when I would say, well, these are not caused by fracking. all I was trying to use was terminology, and I'll do it. I'll say same thing today. If you say to me, these earthquakes are caused by fracking, I'll say, well, there's not a lot of oil and gas drilling right around here in Salina, and yet you're getting earthquakes. They're caused by saltwater disposal, not caused by fracking. So tell me how what you said is true, okay? But yeah, a lot of people didn't take that real well. But it was because I would go to the legislature and testify in front of committees, and they would always, are these caused by fracking? And I would, well, like the water issue, if somebody can sit here and give you a black and white 30-second answer to the water issue in Kansas, well, I would like to meet that person, okay? Because it's a complex issue, and it can't be answered with a sound bite, okay? And the same thing was true with earthquakes. And so if somebody said, we just need to shut down fracking, well, I'm sorry, but that dog don't hunt with me. Having said that, I'm perfectly willing to get up and talk about the role that the oil and gas industry is playing in this problem. In the same way that you have to talk about the role that irrigation is playing when it comes to water, okay? You have to talk about all those things. I think pointing fingers wasn't the way to do it. And the other part of it was the survey has always been viewed as a source of information, not as a source of advocacy. Okay, our role was to go to the legislature and say, here's the issue. Now, what do you want to do? Okay, our role was not to go say, hey, go shut down the oil and gas community or go shut down the irrigation community. That's not what the statutes are about. We are providing information so people can make informed decisions. That was our role. Some days it was hard to stay within that role. People would ask me, what do you think we should do? And I'd say, well, that's not really my job. Well, you can imagine how popular that answer is. But we did come up with a plan for the regulatory agencies to take steps. And the same thing is true on the water side. It's not the survey's job to go out there and say, you need to cut back 20% all across western Kansas. It is our job to provide maps that say, if you cut back 20%, here's what will happen to the life of the aquifer. And that's what we do. And by the way, you didn't ask this question, but I still help go out and measure water levels as part of that program every year because either A, I don't have a life, or B, I enjoy it. So every January I go out with these guys and we spend a week measuring water levels in a set of wells we go back to every year.
Why January? Isn't that cold?
That's a good question.
It is cold. I can't slip anything past you, can we?
No,
you are aware.
Why
January is
January is cold.
It is cold. Well, one of the guys that I work with, his answer would probably be because it's harder and it's more unpleasant. No, we're for the most part measuring water levels in irrigation wells, and you can't measure a water level in an irrigation well when it's pumping. There are big pumps down there that will chew. You measure these with a steel tape. If you lower tape into a pumping well, you will come back without a tape, okay? So you have to go out at a time of year when they're not pumping. Occasionally you'll hit a pumping well in January, not very often. So we try to go out actually the same January 2nd, we go out, go to the same wells every year, and so that's why it's in January. And when the weather's nice, it's fun. When it's snowy or rainy or really, really cold, it's not a whole lot of fun. Yeah. But anyway,
when the weather's nice and it's fun, what makes it fun for you?
I said I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a dryland farm. I don't know anything about irrigation. So a lot of what it is just the learning process. It's fun to learn, to see a lot of things I wouldn't see otherwise. I also it takes you into part of the state that I think are really scenic that I wouldn't see otherwise. I see a lot of animals that I wouldn't see as a result of having done that. It's also, you typically are by yourself all day long, so you leave 6:30 or 7 in the morning, depending on sunup, and you're out there till 6:30 or 7 that night, and you might talk to one or two other people in that process. To me, I'm not a real social person, and it's kind of my idea of a good time. And so I genuinely enjoyed it. Occasionally they ask me to take somebody along with me, and to me, that defeats the purpose. And the world's probably happier if I'm by myself anyway. The other part of it is it's important, okay? You feel like you're doing something that really matters. When we come back with those numbers every year, I'll guarantee you, when I get back to Lawrence, people that I run into walking around will say, What's it look like? Okay, what did you see this year? There is some pride in knowing that numbers that you're collecting in the 1990s and the 2000s are going to be the numbers that people rely on to make decisions long after you're gone. Those are all good reasons. Now, having said that, almost everybody else that I work with thinks I'm nuts. Okay, that is, there are 8 or 10 of us that do that. And most of those 8 or 10 folks, they like doing it. Most of the people I work with wouldn't do it at the point of a gun. I mean, because it can be unpleasant. There are also a lot of people I know that would look at you like, well, why would you want to go spend a week in western Kansas? Well, I can give you a lot of reasons. Yeah. So I gave you some already, okay? And my guess is most of the people that say, why would you want to go spend a week in western Kansas probably haven't spent a week in western Kansas, all right? And I get tired of hearing that because I see things every year that I think are spectacular. So sue me. Anyway,
I've been fortunate to film harvest in western Kansas the last couple summers, and it's different. I'm not by myself; I'm with crews and stuff. But just being out there in that big, expansive sky, and there's something special about it.
It really is. And if you open up your mind to it all, you see that. I do a lot of field trips still, and one of them I've done the last 4 or 5 years. There's a group called Audubon of Kansas, and they bring people in that operate out of Hays to take them out to look at lesser prairie chickens. In the bird watching world, that's a big deal. There aren't very many lesser prairie chickens out there. People come from all over the country to Hays to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to a blind to look at lesser prairie chicken. Well, because there's a lot of demand and there isn't enough blind space, they also put together field trips of non-birding stuff. So I do geology field trips for these folks as something else for them to go do. I can tell you those folks are from all over the country, and they're not waltzing in here with some kind of preconception about western Kansas. They're not like, hell, most Kansans have a bad view, eastern Kansans do, of western Kansas. These people are from all over the country. They're a blank slate. They love it. I mean, those folks can't get enough. And it is so much fun to hang around with people who are genuinely enthusiastic about what they're seeing on the High Plains. Sometimes I think Kansans could use a dose of that, to be a little bit more open-minded, not waltz in with a mindset that's already negative about how flat, boring, dusty, and awful it is, once you get west of U.S. Highway 81, or in my case, where I live in Lawrence, people think you get west of Lawrence and it's western Kansas, and they don't care. But I think if you open your mind up a little bit, you might see it differently.
This episode is sponsored by Renaissance Cafe. Serving Northern Italian cuisine prepared with a fresh, contemporary influence, the Renaissance Cafe is one of Kansas's favorite restaurants. Whether you're planning a romantic dinner date, a family celebration, or an intimate meal with friends, the Renaissance provides a unique dining experience with an old-world atmosphere. Open Thursday through Saturday evenings, the Renaissance Cafe is located just south of Salina in Assyria, Kansas. Visit renaissancecafeassyria.com to book your reservation today. I read your article on KPR about the last symphony on the Flint Hills, and about how that helped maybe raise the level of pride in the Flint Hills. How can we take that energy and put it other places or even across the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. And by the way, that was from a talk I gave out at the symphony, basically saying that I thought the symphony had maybe worked a little bit on that inferiority complex we have. Having said that, I have absolutely no proof for anything that I said out there in that article or that day. That was all anecdotal. It's just what I feel. I do think the pride in the Flint Hills is palpable today. I think if you, even in Lawrence, I was on a radio show one time and I learned that the easiest applause line in the history of mankind, even in Lawrence, was Flint Hills. You say Flint Hills, and people start applauding. Yeah, my question was, well, why don't they feel the same way about the Smoky Hills? Yeah. I certainly do. There's a guy here in Salina, Wes Jackson. You probably know who he is from Land Institute. Wes and I are friends. And Wes one time accused me of being a Smoky Hills chauvinist because I felt that way about the Smoky Hills. Well, I'd probably say the same thing back at Wes. I think Wes is too. I think the Smoky Hills are just as deserving of that affection as the Flint Hills are. Now, how you achieve that is a good question, and I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. But I do think people are maybe a little bit more willing to open up their minds and maybe look at particularly the natural world in those ways. One of the problems is, and this goes back to the demographics that I was talking about before, I say this all the time, half the population in this state now almost half lives in 5 counties. We have 105 counties. Half the people live in 5 of them. Okay, Sedgwick, Johnson, Wyandotte, Shawnee, and Douglas. All right? Almost a fourth of the people in Kansas live in Johnson County. All right? Wow. What that means is people always think about Kansas as being a rural state, but it's not. It's an urban state. When half your population lives in 5 counties, you are an urban state. That means you are apart from the natural world much more than you were when I was a kid, when there were a lot more farmers out there. I think the opportunity to experience the natural world is really, really important. And it's more and more important all the time as it becomes a more and more urban population. And that's why seeing things like that Pawnee Indian Village Museum that Tanner and I went to, okay, that may not be a natural feature. It's certainly a human feature on the landscape, but it fits within the landscape. Those are the kind of places that I think every Kansan should visit. And yet, I don't know about Tanner's experience, but I can guarantee you, when I go out and give talks, I say, how many of you people have ever been to the Pawnee Indian Village Museum? If I get 2 or 3 hands in a crowd of 50, it's a good day, okay? People have you guys been there?
No.
We've heard about it. But
You've heard about it, okay. Tanner's been there, okay.
There's a reason we hired him.
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
That's the very
but
reason we
my
hired him.
point being, I think that is a great place. And yet, all the time I talk to people who've never been there. Do you know what the largest parcel of publicly accessible property of Kansas is? Okay, and while you're thinking, the largest parcel of ground that you could publicly go out to legally and visit in the state, where do you think it is? What would your guess be?
Cheyenne Bottoms.
Cheyenne Bottoms would be a good guess. Yeah. It wouldn't be right, but it would be a good guess.
Thanks.
Cimarron National Grassland in Morton County. It's about 110,000 acres. Have either of you been there?
No.
Exactly. I give talks throughout the state. I ask that question. Virtually nobody has been there. That's the largest parcel of publicly accessible property in Kansas, and yet vast majority of Kansans never been there. Well, part of the reason is where it is, okay? It's closer, and I just looked this up, it's closer to the state capitals of Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico than it is to Topeka. It is a long ways out there. Wow. That's why people have not been there. But I'll tell you, it's one of the most special places in this state. I've had experiences out there. If we got time, and I don't know how we're doing on time here, but I led a field trip out there once for a bunch of legislators, and it was May. And there had been a lot of rain that particular spring, and everywhere there was a blooming flower called Indian blanket. And it's kind of an orange blooming flower, it grows about this tall. As far as the eye could see, that 110,000 acres was covered by blooming wildflowers. Wow. Okay. Now, I grew up, like I said, in the 50s, and I read accounts, and this may be from Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder, where they would talk about how the prairie was a carpet of wildflowers. Mm-hmm. And I remember even as a kid reading that and thinking, well, that's great, but I'll never see that. Mm-hmm. We owned a pasture. I own a pasture to today. It is not a carpet of wildflowers, okay? But that day on the Cimarron National Grasslands, I saw wildflowers as far as I could see. Now, I've traveled a lot all over the world, but I will tell you on that particular day in May, that was as pretty as any place I have ever been. But no, most people have never been there. I think, maybe to go back to your answer or your question about what do we do to change that, I think people have to get out and they've got to see for themselves, and they've got to have an open mind to what they see. They've got to see it for themselves.
I think that's such a great place to leave the interview. That painted such wonderful mental images of what's out there. And it's a good challenge to us and to our audience to get out and see those things. So I hope we can do that.
There are 100 examples. I mean, you don't have to go clear out to Morton County. They're all over the place. I think it's less a question of where you are than it is of how you see the world. And if your definition of scenery is going to be mountains and oceans, then you're probably going to struggle a little bit around here. There's a friend of mine, I talked about him related to symphony, named Jim Hoy, who used to say that the Flint Hills aren't a place that takes your breath away. They're a place you can breathe. Okay, you have to think in a different way, and then it kind of doesn't matter where you are.
There's a lovely quote that comes to mind from, of all things, Ted Lasso, the series, and it's "Be curious, not judgmental."
Yeah,
and when you're in the judgmental state, you look at a place that is devoid of trees, and you think, it doesn't have value. But if you're curious,
exactly.
if you look at these empty squares on the map, and you say, I wonder what's in that square, a lot different outcome.
I saw a piece the other night on sports where Andy Reid, the coach of the Chiefs, keeps or I don't know if he still does, but keep a yellow sticky tag on behind his desk that said, "Don't judge." Well, I thought, well, that's interesting because he's got to spend a lot of his time judging players and judging a lot of things. But I think the point was very much the same. You don't know what other people have been through. I think that was probably the Ted Lasso, don't judge. Again, I have a friend who would say there's more history in a square mile of Kansas soil than there is in all the books put together in all the libraries in the world. Yeah, if you don't judge, if you go into it with a more open mind and a curious mind, I think you've got a lot better shot at seeing things than if you go in with your eyes closed.
Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thank you.
Good to visit with you guys.
Want to spread your organization's message across Kansas? Consider becoming a sponsor. Ask a Kansan has a unique focus on Kansas and its people. By sponsoring our podcast, your organization can reach people from Canarado to Kansas City, Wichita to Washington, and all the great places in between. We have a variety of sponsorship packages available to fit your budget and needs. For more information, visit askakansan.com/sponsorships or call us at 785-571-9507.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Rex Buchanan. I thought Rex's answers were really helpful to me. Sometimes our guests point out things that I haven't really thought about. Like I was kind of prescribing like what Western Kansas needs to do. And he's like, that's really maybe not the right approach is for us Central and Eastern Kansas people to tell Western Kansas what to do. Which is like, actually that makes a lot of sense.
Probably, it's like us telling Florida, hey, you should probably figure out what you're doing with those alligators. Like,
exactly.
That's not safe.
I wanted to give a few shout outs. One is to an article that was done by the Plainspoken Scientist, which is a blog that focuses on science communication. They did a wonderful interview of Rex back in 2015, and that really helped me prep for this interview. So thanks to them. And we also want to thank the Smoky Hill Museum here in Salina. They have been doing, for many years now, actually, a series of presentations called First Thursdays.
Yep.
And they've brought so many great speakers to Salina. And so we've been kind of partnering with them over the last few months. We've had
Dr. Andrew Orr, Dr. Carlton Shield Chief Grover, Adrian Zink. He was one of the very first episodes that we did. So if you want Kansas history, go back to like episode, 3 or 4 with Adrian Zink. That was a really good one.
And if you find yourself in Salina, it's worth a stop. The Smoky Hill Museum.
And I think you can watch them online. I think they're
that's
streamed.
Right. Yeah, we know they're streamed. Somebody at Feely helps do that. So check them out. One of my favorite things they have there is a replica of like a sod house. Which is really cool to see. So did you have anything for the...
I do. I just have fun little stories today.
I love it.
Nothing too crazy. So I was trying to find... I love newspapers.com. Shout out to Adrian again for mentioning this in one of our earlier episodes. And so I asked chat, I go, what are some things, because I wanted to find like odd, funny stories. And I go, I need some terminology to search. And so it gave me oddities, and so that's what I put in my search for newspapers. And I did it from like 1800 to like 1930. That's the date that I gave. And I found this kind of section, and you can go to the next slide. Local oddities. That was the term that I searched. And it's unusual things in Hutchinson, people, things, and things. Period.
Unusual things about Hutchinson people and things.
Yeah.
Things in 2 times that sentence.
Oddities in general is just that sentence.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Okay. I'm excited.
So the first story, and none of these make any sense. Hutchinson has a woman who declares she does not intend to get a new hat this fall. The reason is she already bought 2.
Is this supposed to be like a almost a riddle or something?
I don't know. This is literally the whole
It's so nonsensical.
section. Hutchinson has a woman who declares she does not intend to buy a new hat this fall. The reason is she already has 2. It's almost like a bad joke. Like,
Yeah.
have you heard
With
of
no punchline?
Yeah, with no punchline. Like, have you heard of the woman who refuses to buy a hat this fall
No, why?
because she already has 2? Like, it's a horrible joke.
Yeah, we're
All right.
past for entertainment in 1907.
Yeah, this is October 17th, 1907, so who knows? All right, Hutchinson has a boy who admitted to the school teacher this week that he needed a whipping. His admission of the need frustrated. I think
That's
is
a new word for
frustrated,
me.
but it looks like an L.
I think it's frustrated.
Frustrated the teacher that she has not had nerve yet to tackle the boy, and so he is on parole and may escape the strap altogether.
I'm getting real awkward energy from that whole
Whole thing is just a hot mess in general.
Yeah.
That and the E, if you notice, the E is upside down.
People in prison.
Where'd it go? Oh, there is an upside down E. Oh, yeah, in the...
Yeah, it's weird.
They put the E in
It's
the
super
wrong
weird.
place.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we can move on. All right, this is the last one. Again, this is all one section. Then there is a refreshing incident in Hutchinson. A girl who recently eloped with a former lover has now been reported to be beautiful. So I'm not quite sure. Was she not beautiful before she eloped? And it's a former lover. So what happened to the current lover? There's a lot going on here in this story that I would like the details to.
Like I've also perused newspapers.com a little bit. I was surprised to find that there's like 3 or 4 different papers in Salina's history. I didn't realize that. And yeah, there's a lot of stories in there that would not be stories today for whatever reason.
Yeah. And if you think about like how information was shared back then, like it was literally like if you got sick and the doctor had to be called to your house, that was news.
Yeah. Or if you went to Kansas City to visit your nephew.
Yes.
News.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you how little outside influence these communities had in those times. And like, they were just desperate to be entertained, to be interested in whatever was happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different world we live in.
And everyone's like, privacy. Like privacy hasn't been a thing since 1907. So I don't know.
Fair. Yeah. Yeah. I bet the girl is really happy to be called beautiful.
I'm really confused on that part, but.
Well, on that happy note, thank you for watching or listening to another episode of Ask a Kansan. We're very glad that you joined us today.
Please share this episode or any of our episodes with just one other person. That helps spread the message. Make sure to like and share on social media. Follow us. You can find more information on our website, askakansan.com. You can follow Tanner's stories as he starts traveling a bit more. There's
some great kind of photo essays on our Facebook page and elsewhere that, worth checking out. Takes Tanner a significant amount of time to develop that stuff, and so it's worth checking out.
So we will see you next time.
Thank you.